Why do we meticulously construct our dreams only to quietly dismantle them, brick by brick, as they near completion? The job application left unfinished the night before the deadline. The healthy habits abandoned just as results begin to show. The promising relationship sabotaged with needless conflict. These are not accidents of character, but patterns so precise they resemble rituals, sacred ceremonies of self-defeat performed with unconscious devotion. What ancient wisdom lives in these acts of self-sabotage? What part of us calculates that the pain of failure is preferable to the terror of success? The answers lie in the shadowed corridors of our psyche, where childhood survival strategies still hold sway, where a single humiliating moment from third grade still dictates our adult behavior, where love received with conditions taught us to fear unconditional success. We are all fluent in this secret language of self-limitation, the procrastination that masquerades as perfectionism, the self-doubt that poses as wisdom, the toxic relationships we maintain like familiar prisons. These are not flaws in our design, features, psychological immune responses protecting us from threats our conscious minds have forgotten, but our nervous systems remember. Yet within this paradox lies our salvation. For if we can learn the grammar of our own self-sabotage, we gain the power to rewrite the story. What if these patterns are not enemies to destroy, but messengers bearing urgent news about the boundaries we need to heal? The machinery of self-sabotage operates on hidden gears, each turn calibrated by forces we rarely examine. At its core lies a fundamental paradox. The human mind would rather cling to familiar suffering than risk the terrifying unknown of its own liberation. This is not irrationality, but a perverse form of self-protection. Psyche's attempt to maintain equilibrium in a world it perceives as threatening. Consider how effortlessly we slip into patterns that undermine us, as if guided by an invisible hand. The student who aces every practice test but freezes during the final exam. The artist who abandons their masterpiece just before completion. These are not random failures, but precise strikes against our own advancement, executed with the cold efficiency of an immune system rejecting transplanted organs. Beneath these behaviors pulse two primal fears: the fear of visibility and the fear of abandonment. To succeed is to be seen, and to be seen is to risk judgment. A prospect so intolerable to some nervous systems that failure becomes preferable. Similarly, to outgrow our familiar environments often means leaving behind people who cannot join us in new altitudes, triggering ancient survival alarms that equate belonging with safety. The mind, in its desperate wisdom, would rather preserve dysfunctional connections than face the existential loneliness of evolution. This is why self-sabotage so often strikes at threshold moments. Promotions, commitments, creative breakthroughs, where crossing over would demand leaving parts of ourselves behind. Yet there exists an even deeper layer: the unconscious loyalty to inherited narratives. Like spiritual DNA, we carry stories of what our family lines believed possible. We don't do that. People like us don't get that. Dreamers get hurt. These silent oaths operate beneath awareness, causing individuals to unconsciously cap their achievements at the height of their ancestors' tallest stories. The entrepreneur who inexplicably tanks their business upon reaching their parents' lifetime earnings. The writer who loses motivation the moment their work gains serious recognition. These are not coincidences, but unconscious acts of fidelity to generational ceilings. The cruel irony: these self-sabotaging mechanisms were once adaptive. The child who learned to dim their light to avoid a parent's jealousy survives into adulthood as the employee who hesitates to claim credit. The teenager who associated romantic passion with volatility now sabotages stable relationships. What protected us then strangles us now. Yet we continue the rituals, not because we want to suffer, but because on some subterranean level, we still believe they keep us safe. There is an old folktale about a fox that spends its nights gnawing off its own leg to escape traps that no longer exist, its teeth tearing into flesh long after the hunters have left the forest. This is the tragedy of self-sabotage. We keep chewing through our own potential to escape threats that vanished years ago, our jaws still working against phantom dangers. The traps now live only in memory, yet we remain prisoners of their silhouette. Consider the myth of Sisyphus, not as Camus' absurd hero, but as a different kind of parable. Modern psychology might reinterpret his eternal struggle. The boulder rolls back not because the gods decree it, but because some part of Sisyphus himself nudges it backward each time he nears the summit. Why? Because the plateau has become his identity. The straining muscles, his familiar companions. To reach the top would mean facing the terrifying question: what comes after the struggle I've built my life around? We are all Sisyphus in our way, secretly attached to our boulders, fearing the emptiness of a peak where no struggle awaits. Then there's the lesser-known Buddhist tale of the Golden Buddha. For centuries, clay-covered statues stood unremarkable until a crack revealed the solid gold beneath. Our self-sabotaging behaviors are like that clay, not mere obscurations, but protective coatings grown thick during seasons when shining was dangerous. The overworker who can't stop long enough to enjoy success isn't flawed. Their relentless motion once shielded them from childhood neglect. The people-pleaser who sabotages boundaries isn't weak. Their accommodation prevented parental rage. These adaptations were brilliant survival strategies that outlived their necessity, becoming the very barriers to our liberation. Perhaps most revealing is the alchemical concept of solve et coagula, dissolve and coagulate. The process of transformation requires both breaking down and reforming. Viewed through this lens, self-sabotage becomes a distorted reflection of this sacred process. Our psyche's clumsy attempt to dissolve what must be released before new growth can solidify. The failed relationships, abandoned projects, and missed opportunities may be not just wounds, but the psyche's unskilled effort at rebirth, like a butterfly picking at its chrysalis too soon. The moment we stop treating self-sabotage as an enemy to vanquish and begin regarding it as a misguided ally, everything shifts. Imagine approaching these patterns not with frustration, but with anthropological curiosity, as if studying the rituals of an ancient tribe that believes it must sacrifice crops to ensure the sun's return. The key lies not in eliminating the behavior, but in decoding its original protective purpose. When procrastination strikes at the brink of success, instead of self-flagellation, we might ask, what ancient danger does my nervous system believe it's avoiding? The answer often leads to forgotten moments when visibility brought punishment, or when excellence triggered abandonment. This work demands concrete rituals of reconditioning. For the perfectionist who stores projects indefinitely, setting artificial imperfection deadlines can rewire the brain. Completing a presentation 20% worse than possible and observing that the world doesn't end. For those who sabotage relationships when they grow intimate, practicing conscious vulnerability in microdoses, a slightly riskier text, a small confession to a friend, builds tolerance for connection's discomfort. These are neurological retrainings, teaching the limbic system that safety and expansion can coexist. The goal isn't to eradicate self-protective impulses, but to update their software, shifting from don't stand out or you'll be hurt to you can handle visibility's discomfort. Organizations and leaders who understand this psychology create cultures where self-sabotage loses its grip. Companies that normalize discussing failure remove the shame that fuels imposter syndrome. Teachers who frame growth edges as skills your nervous system hasn't yet trusted, rather than deficiencies, help students bypass self-judgment's paralysis. On a societal level, recognizing how economic instability and systemic oppression breed self-sabotage as rational adaptation, why invest in futures you've been taught are impossible, reveals that what we pathologize as individual failing often mirrors collective trauma. Self-sabotage, when fully understood, becomes the most accurate compass we possess, not for where we're broken, but for where we're most tender, most fiercely protective of old wounds that still whisper warnings. The patterns that frustrate us today were once strokes of genius that kept our hearts beating during emotional famines. To transcend them requires neither war nor surrender, but something far more nuanced. A sacred negotiation between the parts of us that fear change and the parts that ache for it. This is the alchemy, that moment when you pause mid-sabotage, wine glass halfway to your lips the night before a pivotal meeting, cursor hovering over the self-deprecating email, and instead of judgment, you feel something unexpected, gratitude. Your defenses loved you enough to build these labyrinths. Now it's time to walk out together, hand in hand with every version of you that believed playing small was the price of survival. The exit door reads, you are no longer who you were when these patterns began. Cross that threshold just once. Let one project be completed imperfectly, one opportunity seized without over-preparation, one vulnerable truth spoken unedited, and you'll discover the secret. On the other side of self-sabotage waits a version of you that knew all along how to fly, but had to wait for the rest of you to stop clipping its wings.